You mentioned a little bit earlier, Orrin, that you talked about urban agriculture. You talked about Illinois. You talked about how Illinois is a lot of soybeans and corn. We have to create more farmers, both in the cities and in the rural areas. One of the groups that has kept popping up that I've had only brief contact with, but that I know you know more about, are the Pembroke farmers, which, to my understanding, is mostly African American community outside of Kankakee. I know there's a black rodeo that came out of there. Tell us a little bit about Pembroke and the trials and tribulations and the successes that they've had, and what you know about them. Because last time I had contact, someone came around, took information about what they thought they could grow that would meet our needs, and then I didn't hear back.
Right. Well, the Pembroke community, like you mentioned, is principally an African American community, and it's really a township, and there's several municipalities in that in that area that are contiguous, and we're talking about places like St. Anne's and Moments and Hopkins Park down in that part of Kankakee County. It has a long history. And been involved in everything from bootlegging back in the Prohibition days, whatever the case may be. They've got archaeological stuff going on, and well, American and African American history stuff going on down there. So it's an exciting community, but it's also a metaphor for small disadvantaged farmers, and how the USDA and county and state governments basically ignored African American farmers. African American farmers over the last 100 years have gone from almost 1 million down to only about 17,000. And the black land loss in this country has gone from about 15 million acres down to about 2.2 million acres. The communities down there as well are an example of how much land is available that's not even being used. I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of about 12 or 14 different people that I know who actually own land down there, who live in the city, and I'm talking about 40, 50-acre sites with nothing growing on it. So there's tremendous potential down there in terms of getting that agricultural sector cranked back up and growing for local needs. And back to the experience you had, oftentimes farmers in communities like that, they have land, they have interest, they can even get crops in the ground, but because of limited resources, they can't necessarily get it out of the ground, they can't get it processed in terms of post-harvest handling, and then get it transported to you. So while there's certainly energy and the desire to do business, the resources aren't always there. And labor is one of the principal problems that those kind of communities have, and it's an issue that we're going to have to deal with in terms of urban agriculture as well.
Would you say that Pembroke is growing, or are they having a harder time? I mean, we have a resurgence of farmers markets. We have all this interest in urban agriculture. We have more and more people. First, we should address the question of organic in cooperation. Organic, local, sustainable, where that's in contradiction. But I still want to talk a little bit about Pembroke. Do you see them tying into that kind of explosion of farmers markets that's happening? Do you see that they don't get into that as much, that there's other small farmers and back to the landers who are more in tune maybe with that situation? Where's that going?
Well, the farmers market landscape is really a pretty tricky one. I think oftentimes city folks, we're enamored by farmers markets and think they're wonderful, but they never really took off in communities of color. And rather than being a source of income for small farmers and people of color, that hasn't been the case. In fact, there's a lot of tweaking and looking at how that system really works in communities. And that's another one of our reasons why we're inspired by creating community scale markets, which allow people through a distribution network that would be attached to those markets, have farmers actually be able to bring produce in and not be limited to one day a week or whatever the case may be. Farmers markets are tricky for farmers as well, and most people don't understand because, how much do you pick? How much do you bring? Once you take it off the vine, then of course you can't put it back. A lot of farmers like to participate, and they're a good thing, but they're tricky and they're hard to do. So we need to create a system that is connected to farmers, particularly small and medium-sized growers, that they have access to almost on a daily basis.
I really liked it. I mean, it just sort of clicked for me just now. The weekend farmers market versus a community market where, someone could go to that store and get local produce on a weekly basis. Because I got to say, what's been a real help to us in these, just on our business side here at the Heartland, during difficult times, particularly last summer, I would go in that Dodge pickup truck up to the Evanston Farmers Market, and over the years have cultivated a number of friendships with various farmers, some organic, some just fresh. They would, at the end of the day, if there wasn't a real good day up there, they would just load my truck up with stuff.
Right.
And then, which I would bring back and share at a decent price with folks shopping here on Sunday, as well as have lots of it during the week.
Right.
So, in fact, last fall, we had so much produce, I filled 4 or 5 freezers with peppers and onions and fruit and apples. So, we had frozen, but, at least local stuff going into the pies, going into the sauces, and that's for, well into the winter. It's just now that those freezers are emptying out.
Right. Well, I think you really hit on it, and I mean, the conversation about urban agriculture is an incomplete one because it really is about the whole system that you need to support urban agriculture. It's about value-added products. It's about all of that stuff, and it is about distribution, cold storage, warehousing. It's about institutional buyers. It's about restaurants. It's about people in the community. And so we need an infrastructure to support all of that. And that's as important, if not more important, than actually growing food in Inglewood or Rogers Park or whatever the case may be. That really is where the rubber meets the road, and where a lot of this work is really around is how do you do that. Alderman Lyle in the 6th Ward, for example, wants to look at that community because the 6th Ward is also intersected by 9094, the Dan Ryan Expressway. And so she wants to look at how that community becomes part of the infrastructure to support local and regional agriculture, whether it's rural or whether it's urban. Right off the expressway, what kind of markets that means, how do we support farmers, how do we have the commercial kitchens to, flash freeze stuff for supplies over the wintertime, or to make pickles or salsa or whatever the case may be. So that's, like I said, is an important part of this as actually growing food, is having the infrastructure we need to support it. Even more critical because the research that we've done certainly indicates to us between Milwaukee and going east to Detroit, you have 4 major metropolitan areas. The Milwaukee metro area, Chicago metro area, which includes northwest Indiana, and in fact the southern counties of Wisconsin. You've got Indianapolis going east, and you've got Detroit, where you've got 17 million people. You've got huge opportunities for urban agriculture. I mean, think Gary. Think about all of the stuff that left there.
That could be one big farm.
Right. Think Detroit, where people there are doing great work. We were just there about a month ago. and then all the rural land in between. And so the metropolitan areas have almost, if not more than half of the population in the areas between Milwaukee and Detroit. It's 34 million people. The metro areas have about 17 million of those people. So huge potential. Everybody's beginning to recognize it. And what's really makes me happy is the fact that there's a lot of grassroots efforts, a lot of different people involved, a lot of really good people. And there's a good mix of university folks and grassroots folks and farmers and would-be farmers and the whole 9 yards.